Okay, everyone. Welcome. We're going to walk through in this video how to create the Okun's laws graphs in Excel. This exercise is we're going to have a couple exercises that we do in Excel. Part of the idea is to help prepare you for all the other times later in your business school life that you're going to be using Excel. And it's also just good in general to know how to use Excel, but this is also to help reinforce in your mind how Okun's law works, to get that understanding the relationship between change in the unemployment rate and change in or GDP growth rate. So we have this data sheet that I'll provide to you on Moodle has the data for various countries for the unemployment rate and for the real GDP. So to create the graph, first thing you need to do is make two new columns for the two things that show up in the graph. That is the change in the unemployment rate and the GDP growth rate, right? So let's come over here and let's create a new column for our, do the y-axis, change in the unemployment rate first. If you put that first, the first column that you enter into your graph will automatically be the y-axis. So you want to do change in unemployment being the first one. So change in unemployment. I'm going to widen that column a little bit so that we can see all of that. And I misspelled it. So let me just come up here and change in unemployment. I still misspelled it. Change in unemployment. Hopefully that's correct now. Okay, so if I can switch my share here to show you the calculations in the previous video. Remember that the change in the unemployment rate is this year's unemployment minus the previous year's unemployment. Now, that implies that we can't calculate this for the first year that we have data because we don't know that year's previous unemployment rate. So let me go back to that Excel sheet. So we're going to go to the second year that we have the data here. I'm going to do this for the United States. You create a graph for one of the other countries. So we want it to calculate for the second year. It's 1961, I believe. Here's our second year of data. For 1961, we want it to calculate the change in the unemployment. When we want Excel to calculate something for us, we start by putting in the equal sign. So I put an equal sign in that box. Now, the next thing I want to put is tell it to find the unemployment rate for this year, and then I'm subtract the unemployment rate for the previous year. So I come over to the United States unemployment rate, and I click this year's unemployment rate. If I come back over here, we see it's put the name of that cell in there. That cell was H18. It's column H, right? So this is column H and row 18. So this is cell H18. So let's put that into our graph there. And well, now me clicking on there, change it. So I'm just going to type in H18. You can type in the names of the cells as well as clicking on them. And then we put H18 minus, we want the previous year's unemployment rate. So I click on that one. I come back to here. We have now H18 minus H17. So if we hit the enter, it now calculates the change in the unemployment rate. So now if I click on that box, we want to do that for all the other cells. It'd take a long time to do that for all the cells. Instead, we can just click on this box so that we have this green outline around the cell that we just calculated. And in this corner, there's this green box. If I click on that green box, notice how when I move my mouse over that green square there, how it turns to this black plus sign. Once it turns into that black plus sign, we can now click down and we can pull this down. And so I'll go ahead and release it here. And it's filling in all these numbers. Now, if I click in one of these boxes here, right, it shows me the calculation up here for that box. This is H22 minus 21, right? So this is for row 22. It knows to automatically change it for each one of your rows to be do this row minus the previous row, and it does that automatically for you. So we can go ahead and continue to just drag this down till we get to the bottom of all of our data down there. So just keep clicking that green square, calculate it, and now we have it for all of our pieces of data. Okay, let's just make sure that, let's see, US unemployment rate. Okay, we have here, okay, we do have data in that last entry there. Okay, so the next thing we need to calculate is the GDP growth rate. So I'm going to calculate GDP rate. And again, if I go back to my calculations from the video we watched before this. Oh, let me just play this a little farther in the video here. So let's see here. Yeah, okay. So the GDP growth rate is equal to this year's GDP minus the previous year's GDP divided by the previous year's GDP. So first we got to put this parentheses. We got to put the parentheses around this so that when it divides, it knows to divide by this calculation and not just the last one you enter. So we're going to need parentheses, this year's GDP minus the previous year's GDP, in parentheses, divisor sign, divide by the previous year's GDP. Okay, so let's go back to our Excel sheet here. And so again, we can't do it for the very first year that we have data because we need the previous year's data. Again, we want Excel to calculate it first, so we hit it equal sign, and then we find the row for the United States real GDP. Oh, we got to remember to put that open parentheses, and then we're going to click on this year's GDP minus the previous year's GDP. We do the end parentheses so that when we divide, it divides by that difference, right? So we have the change in GDP there. Then we hit the divisor sign, and then again, we do the previous year's GDP. So this calculates for us the GDP growth rate. So the GDP growth rate there was something like 2%. Let's bring this down. Down. Okay. Again, I was just grabbing that green square and then holding down on my mouse button or my trackpad and dragging it down. So now we have our two columns of data that we need for the chart. To select these charts for putting them in a graph, I'm going to click on the title here of one, hold shift down so I can click on another box so it knows to keep what we previously had selected and to add what we click on now. And then I'm going to go down to the very bottom. And again, I hold shift so it knows to add all these. And I again click on one of these squares at the very bottom. So that gets all of our data is selected here with this green box around it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click insert on my Excel sheet. So it brings up this tab for insert. And I want to use these XY scatter graphs. So notice how it has these just kind of scattering of dots there. So I click on that and I'm just going to click the first one with the scattering of the dots. And we now have the start of our graph here. Okay, we're going to have to add, we want to make it look like what showed up in the book. So we're going to have to add axes on each side, add a trend line, add the calculation. So let's go over here. This is on the chart design. If you're not clicked on the chart, you won't see that, but then you can just click on the chart. It brings that chart design tab up, and then you can add chart elements. So we want to add axis titles for the primary horizontal axis, add a axis title for the primary vertical axis. Now we have these titles. Let's change all these. So I'm going to click on that text box and then click inside the text box and then delete the text that was there before. And so for my title, I'm going to do Okun's Law, United States. Over here, then I'm going to click on the vertical axis. Again, click on the text box, then click in to select the text box, then click inside the text box, then delete the text. On the vertical axis, I want to put that is the change in unemployment. Then I come down to the horizontal axis. Again, click on the text box, then click in the text box, and then we can delete the text and add what you want. And this is GDP growth rate. So we have all of our titles. Oops, I don't want that. Okay, and then I'm going to come back to add a chart element, and I'm going to add a trend line. And we want a linear trend line. So I click on that linear trend line. And so now you see the trend line in here. Now, if I click on this trend line here, and I'm going to double click on that trend line. When I double clicked on that trend line, it opened up over here the format trend line box. And we want specifically, there's 3 tabs up here at this. We want this third one with the 3 bars. And we want to go down to the very bottom and say display equation on the chart, display the R squared on the chart. And so here we have that equation. Let's drag it to where it's more readable. There we go. And so now we've created our Okun's Law graph just like they show you in the textbook. The last step here is to copy it into a Word document or some document so you can submit it online on Moodle. To do that, you can just double click on, is what I do on the mouse on my Mac. I believe on a Windows computer, it might be to right click, but you just want to click on the graph and bring up one of these and then hit copy. And then you can copy that chart, paste it into a Word document. So that's how you create this. Again, if you have any questions, you can submit questions on the forum um, on Moodle. This is also something, if you're having problems with, you can feel free to set up a time to Zoom with me, and I go right over with this. This is for you to learn how to use Excel. I don't expect you to know how to use it already. So if you have any problems, right, I'll walk you right through it. If you tell me you need help, right, until I'm able to help you, your deadline will be extended, right? But don't feel afraid to ask me for the help to get this done. Okay, good luck creating your graphs.